You've been nothing but a parasite, living off my husband's success." When those cruel words came from my daughter-in-law's mouth as I stood beside my only son's casket, something broke inside me that could never be repaired. But what Angela didn't realize was that throughout my 45-year career as an estate attorney, I had counseled hundreds of families through their darkest moments, and within 20 minutes, when the will was read, the woman who had dismissed my entire existence would understand exactly how wrong she had been about our relationship. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something special that will show you how to protect yourself and your legacy from those who might try to diminish your worth. My name is Margaret Walsh, and at 73, I've learned that sometimes the very people who should understand your love the most profoundly are the ones quickest to dismiss it when grief and money cloud their judgment. For over 4 decades, I built my career as an estate attorney, eventually becoming one of the most respected specialists in family wealth transfer and inheritance planning in Hamilton County. I helped countless families navigate the emotional and financial complexities that arise when a loved one passes, seeing firsthand how death can transform even seemingly close family bonds into battlegrounds of resentment and entitlement. Throughout my professional life, I became known for creating estate plans that truly honored a person's wishes while minimizing family conflict. I worked on landmark cases establishing precedents for how non-traditional family contributions should be valued in inheritance disputes. I witnessed hundreds of families torn apart by greed and misunderstanding, and I vowed that my own family would never suffer that fate. The bitter irony that my professional expertise would eventually become necessary in my personal life is something I'm still processing months after my son Jeffrey's unexpected death. In my practice, I always emphasize that inheritance isn't merely about distributing assets. It's about honoring relationships and recognizing the complex web of contributions, both financial and emotional, that shape a family's well-being. I believed that understanding was shared within my own family until a single moment of brutal hostility revealed how mistaken I had been all along. Many of you watching might think that standing silently while being publicly humiliated at your only child's funeral seems implausibly passive. I want to be clear. My silence wasn't from weakness or shock, though both were certainly present. It was the culmination of years of strategic patience, careful legal planning, and ultimately, honoring my son's explicit wishes about how this inevitable confrontation should unfold. Sometimes wisdom comes in knowing exactly when not to speak. This is the story of how I came to that painful moment beside my son's casket, the careful steps we had taken together to ensure his legacy would be protected, and the unexpected healing that eventually emerged from the most devastating chapter of my life. My journey to that heartbreaking funeral began decades earlier, long before Angela ever entered our lives. I met my late husband, Richard, during my second year of law school at Wellston University. He was a literature professor with a poet's heart and an unwavering moral compass. We built a life balanced between my analytical legal mind and his philosophical nature, creating a home filled with both intellectual debate and deep emotional connection. Logic and literature, Richard would often say, the perfect combination for understanding the human condition. Our dinner conversations would weave between the ethical implications of my cases and the profound insights of the novels he taught. These weren't just academic discussions, but the foundation of our shared worldview, one that valued both clear thinking and emotional depth. Our son Jeffrey was born 3 years after we married. From the beginning, he was a remarkable child, thoughtful, and compassionate, with a natural gift for understanding complex systems that eventually led him to a brilliant career in software engineering. Richard and I tried to instill in him our values of integrity, generosity, and the understanding that true wealth lies in relationships rather than bank accounts. "He has your mind and my heart," Richard would often say as we watched Jeffrey grow into a young man who could both create sophisticated computer programs and show extraordinary empathy for others. That combination will serve him well in a world that too often separates the two. Jeffrey's childhood was filled with both intellectual exploration and emotional connection. Where many parents might have pushed their obviously gifted child toward competitive achievement alone, Richard and I deliberately cultivated his emotional intelligence alongside his academic abilities. We celebrated his perfect math scores, certainly, but were equally proud when his fourth-grade teacher called to tell us he had spent his recesses helping a struggling classmate understand fractions. Through his teenage years, while many of his peers became absorbed in social status or rebellion, Jeffrey maintained his dual focus on intellectual pursuits and human connection. He developed pioneering computer programs while also volunteering at the local hospital, creating a system to coordinate volunteer schedules that the administration eventually adopted officially. This blend of technical brilliance and genuine compassion foreshadowed the path his life would take. People think technology and humanity are opposing forces, he told me during his college years at MIT, where he was already developing the concepts that would eventually become his life's work. But I believe technology is only meaningful when it serves human needs and enhances human connections. I wanted to believe Richard was right about Jeffrey's balanced perspective, and for many years his life seemed to validate that hope. He excelled academically and professionally, leveraging his unique combination of technical brilliance and emotional intelligence to build innovative software that helped medical researchers collaborate more effectively. His work, quite literally, saved lives by accelerating the development of new treatments, something that brought him far more satisfaction than the considerable financial success that accompanied it. When Richard passed away suddenly from a heart attack 12 years ago, Jeffrey was already established in his career and had just founded his own health technology company, ConnectMed. The loss of my husband was devastating. We had planned a retirement filled with travel, community service, and quiet evenings discussing books and ideas. Instead, I found myself alone at 61, facing a future very different from the one we had envisioned together. The grief was overwhelming in those early months. Richard and I had been partners in every sense of the word for nearly 40 years. We had built our lives around each other, developed a private language of shared references and inside jokes, created routines that suddenly became painful reminders of absence. The house we had filled with conversation fell silent. The garden we had tended together began to wilt under my inconsistent care. During that period of grief, Jeffrey provided unwavering support that went far beyond what many adult children offer. He visited regularly, called daily, and made sure I remained, connected to a world that suddenly seemed much emptier without Richard. He didn't just check boxes of filial duty, but engaged with my grief authentically, sharing memories of his father and acknowledging his own loss while still providing steady strength for me to lean on. Dad would want us to honor him by living fully. Jeffrey reminded me gently when I hesitated to accept an invitation to join a widow's support group. Not by moving on quickly or forgetting, but by continuing to embrace the values you shared. This perspective, honoring lost loved ones through how we live rather than through extended isolation, reflected the wisdom Richard and I had tried to instill. Jeffrey's ability to navigate grief with both emotional honesty and forward momentum made me deeply proud of the man he had become. When he met Angela 6 months after his father's death, I was genuinely happy for him, grateful that he had found someone to share his life with after witnessing the depth of loss that can come when a true partnership ends. Our family had always believed in the healing power of connection, and seeing Jeffrey open himself to new love felt like watching Richard's philosophy in action. Angela Pierce was beautiful, ambitious, and charming, at least initially. She worked in pharmaceutical marketing for Westbrook Pharmaceuticals, and her polished presentation and business acumen impressed both Jeffrey and me during those early meetings. With her sleek dark hair, designer clothes, and confident manner, she commanded attention in any room, a quality that seemed to complement Jeffrey's more thoughtful, quietly brilliant presence. She understands the healthcare industry from the business side, Jeffrey explained enthusiastically after their third date. She sees applications for ConnectMed's technology that I hadn't even considered. We spent hours talking about how to scale the platform to reach more research institutions. If I occasionally noticed a calculating quality in her questions about Jeffrey's company or our family's financial situation, I dismissed my concerns as overprotectiveness or perhaps projecting my own professional skepticism onto an innocent relationship. As an estate attorney, I had perhaps become too accustomed to looking for hidden motives where finances were concerned. "You're just being a cautious lawyer," I told myself after one dinner where Angela had skillfully extracted detailed information about ConnectMed's venture capital prospects. Not everyone approaches relationships with potential ulterior motives. When Jeffrey announced their engagement after just 8 months of dating, I admitted my mild reservations only once, gently suggesting that they might benefit from a longer courtship. His response was both loving and firm. "Mom, she makes me happy," Jeffrey told me, his eyes bright with certainty. "After watching what you and Dad had, I know what real partnership looks like. Angela and I complement each other perfectly. Her business vision and my technical expertise. We're stronger together." Those words reassured me, seeming to confirm that despite my occasional misgivings, Jeffrey recognized in Angela the potential for the kind of deep, mutual support that had characterized my relationship with Richard. When they married in an lavish ceremony at the Lynbrook Hotel that Angela insisted was necessary for networking with key industry players, I embraced her as my daughter-in-law with cautious optimism and genuine hope. "Welcome to our family," I told her sincerely at the reception, offering a family heirloom, a delicate sapphire bracelet that had belonged to my grandmother, as a traditional gift. "I hope you'll be as happy with Jeffrey as I was with Richard." Her response was polite, but revealing in hindsight. "Thank you, Margaret. I'm sure Jeffrey and I will build something even more impressive together. Not happiness or love, but something impressive, an achievement rather than a connection." The first years of their marriage coincided with explosive growth in Jeffrey's company. ConnectMed's collaborative research platform was implemented by Meridian Pharmaceuticals, leading to a series of increasingly lucrative contracts. Angela transitioned from her marketing position at Westbrook to a role in Jeffrey's company, heading up client relations and business development. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect power couple, brilliant, successful, and completely in sync professionally and personally. They purchased a stunning modern home in Lakewood Heights, the most exclusive neighborhood in our city. They traveled to industry conferences in Milan, Tokyo, and London. Their photos appeared in business magazines and local society pages alike, always showing them as the ideal blend of intelligence, ambition, and apparent devotion. Jeffrey seemed to be living the dream, professional success built on meaningful work, combined with a supportive partnership. My relationship with Angela during this period was cordial, but increasingly distant. Our interactions, once warm, if somewhat superficial, gradually became perfunctory and schedule-driven. After the first year of their marriage, our traditional Sunday dinners dwindled to monthly, then quarterly obligations. Invitations to their home became rare and were always framed around business events where my presence as Jeffrey's mother, the attorney, might impress potential clients. "Angela believes family and business should remain separate," Jeffrey explained. When I asked why I hadn't been included in their Thanksgiving plans, the first holiday I would spend entirely alone since Richard's death, "She thinks it creates cleaner professional boundaries." This philosophy, directly contradicting the integrated approach to life that Richard and I had modeled and Jeffrey had always valued, was an early warning sign I regret not addressing more directly. For our family, relationships had always been the foundation upon which all other aspects of life were built, not compartments to be separated for strategic advantage. "We're just so busy with the company's expansion," was Jeffrey's constant explanation for their increasing absence from family gatherings or traditional holidays. "Angela's coordinating our entry into the European market, and the time difference means we're taking calls at all hours." I understood demanding careers. My own practice had often required sacrifices of personal time. What troubled me was the subtle shift in Jeffrey himself. The compassionate, balanced young man who had valued relationships as highly as achievements began to speak almost exclusively of business metrics, market positioning, and the material trappings of his success. In our increasingly rare private conversations, Angela was always referenced in terms of her business contributions rather than their personal connection. Angela negotiated an additional $3 million in the Series C funding round, he would tell me with evident pride. But gone were the kinds of statements I had heard during his previous relationships, reflections on shared values, simple joys, or emotional connection. I never once heard him say, "Angela makes me laugh," or "Angela understands me," or any of the fundamentally human aspects of partnership that had defined his parents' marriage. 4 years into their marriage, I began to notice concerning patterns during the few family gatherings that still occurred. Angela controlled most conversations, frequently interrupted or corrected Jeffrey, and made subtle but constant references to how she had transformed his little startup into a real company. Jeffrey, once confidently articulate about his vision, increasingly deferred to Angela's version of events and accomplishments. During a Christmas dinner at their home, to which I had been invited primarily because a key investor was present, I observed a particularly troubling interaction. Jeffrey was explaining how ConnectMed's original algorithm had been inspired by his volunteer work at the hospital during high school, connecting his technology to his long-standing compassion for patient care. The technical approach was promising, but fundamentally unmarketable, Angela interrupted, placing her hand over his on the table in a gesture that appeared affectionate, but effectively silenced him. The European expansion was entirely my strategy. Jeffrey was still thinking too small, focused on the technology instead of the business potential. I helped him understand what his work was actually worth. This revisionist history, I had been present for many early strategy discussions where Jeffrey clearly articulated global expansion plans long before meeting Angela, concerned me deeply. More troubling was Jeffrey's apparent acceptance of this narrative, as though his contributions were indeed secondary to Angela's business acumen. Later that evening, when I helped clear dishes while Angela entertained the investor in the living room, I noticed how exhausted Jeffrey looked away from the public performance. The confident posture disappeared, the light in his eyes dimmed. He moved mechanically, speaking little, as though conserving essential energy. "Are you sleeping enough?" I asked gently, mother's concern overriding professional discretion. "You look tired, sweetheart." "The company's at a critical growth stage," he replied automatically, the response sounding rehearsed. "Angela says we need to maintain momentum or risk losing market position." The phrase "Angela says" appeared with increasing frequency in our conversations. I realized a verbal tic that suggested her opinions had become the primary guide for his decisions, both professional and personal. I attempted to address these concerns gently during a rare mother-son lunch without Angela present. We met at Riverside Cafe, a small restaurant we had frequented together since his college days, where the familiar setting might encourage more open conversation. "You seem to be giving Angela credit for much of your company's vision lately," I observed carefully, after we had moved past initial pleasantries. "But I remember how clearly you mapped out the global implementation strategy years ago, even before you met her." Jeffrey's response was defensive in a way that immediately heightened my concern. He set down his fork with uncharacteristic abruptness, a flash of something like fear crossing his face before being replaced by a practiced smile. "Angela has sacrificed everything for the company, Mom. Her connections and business strategy were what translated my technical ideas into actual market success. I need to acknowledge that publicly. The phrasing, that he needed to acknowledge her contributions, suggested obligation rather than genuine belief, raising questions about the dynamics operating behind their public presentation. As an estate attorney who had witnessed countless relationship power imbalances affect inheritance and business succession planning, I recognized warning signs I could not ignore. "Jeffrey," I asked directly, keeping my voice gentle but firm, "are you happy with how decisions are being made in your marriage and company?" His hesitation before answering told me everything I needed to know, even before he carefully formulated a response that sounded rehearsed. He looked down at his plate, then out the window, anywhere but directly at me, the same avoidance pattern he had shown as a child when trying to conceal something difficult. "Angela and I are building something important together," he finally said, his voice carefully modulated. "All partnerships require compromise and recognition of different strengths. Her business focus complements my technical capabilities." What he wasn't saying, that their relationship had become primarily transactional rather than emotionally supportive, hung in the air between us. As his mother, I wanted to press further. As an attorney who respected adult autonomy, I recognized the limits of my right to intervene. Instead, I simply reminded him of something his father had often said during his university lectures on relationship dynamics in literature. "Your father always told his students that true partnership elevates both people," I said, reaching across the table to briefly touch his hand. "If one person is diminished by the relationship, it's not a partnership at all." The barely perceptible flinch when I touched him, another warning sign from a son who had always been comfortable with physical affection, reinforced my growing concern. Something was deeply wrong in Jeffrey's marriage and business partnership, but he wasn't yet ready to fully acknowledge or address it. Pushing too hard might only drive him further away, cutting off the limited communication we still maintained. 2 weeks after that conversation, on a rainy Tuesday evening, Jeffrey called and asked to meet at my home rather than a restaurant, the first time he had made such a request in nearly 2 years. When he arrived, the physical change in him was shocking. He had lost at least 15 pounds from his already lean frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and the confident posture I had always associated with him had collapsed into something tense and guarded. "Can we talk in your office?" he asked, immediately, glancing back toward his car as though worried he had been followed. "I need privacy and security." I led him to my home office, the room where I had often worked on particularly sensitive estate cases after hours. Once the door was closed, he performed a strange ritual I had never seen from him before, checking that the windows were fully closed, glancing around for electronic devices, and finally sitting with his back to the wall rather than in the more comfortable chair across from my desk. "Mom," he said after declining even water, his voice low and tense, "I need your professional help, not just your motherly advice. I need to restructure my estate planning immediately, and it needs to be completely confidential." For the next 2 hours, Jeffrey shared a story that broke my heart as both his mother and as a professional who had seen too many similar situations. Angela had gradually taken control of not just their public narrative, but their financial and legal arrangements as well. Through a series of business maneuvers, some ethically questionable though technically legal, she had positioned herself to potentially take full control of his company, his life's work, while systematically isolating him from friends, family, and even key employees who had been with him from the beginning. "She's convinced half the board that I'm becoming erratic and too focused on research rather than profitability," he explained, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Last week I discovered she's been meeting with venture capital firms about a potential structure that would effectively remove me from operational control while keeping me as the genius founder figurehead. These business maneuvers, concerning as they were, paled in comparison to the personal dynamics he described. Angela had employed classic techniques of psychological control, alternating criticism and praise to keep him off balance, questioning his memory of events and conversations, suggesting that his perceptions were unreliable and gradually convincing him that no one else could possibly understand or value his work appropriately. She tells me daily that no one else would understand or value my work the way she does, he confessed, finally meeting my eyes directly, his own swimming with unshed tears. That without her business direction, I'd still be running a struggling startup that couldn't effectively distribute my technology. And the worst part is, I started to believe her. The technical term for this pattern, gaslighting, was one I had encountered numerous times in my professional capacity, particularly in cases where financial control and inheritance were at stake. Seeing it enacted against my own son produced a visceral rage I carefully concealed beneath professional composure. This wasn't the moment for maternal indignation, but for the clear-headed legal expertise Jeffrey had specifically sought. "When did you begin to recognize what was happening?" I asked, keeping my voice measured and factual, giving him the dignity of professional consultation rather than parental reaction. 3 months ago. ConnectMed's original research director, Dr. Elaine Chen, who helped develop our core algorithms, sent me research showing that our technology was being repositioned away from rare disease collaboration toward more profitable but less impactful applications. When I questioned this shift, Angela produced meeting minutes showing I had approved it, minutes I have no memory of seeing or signing. This discrepancy led Jeffrey to quietly investigate other company decisions, ultimately discovering a pattern of systematic repositioning away from his original mission of accelerating collaboration for difficult medical challenges toward more commercially lucrative but less transformative applications. The company is becoming exactly what I never wanted, a profit-maximizing entity that views patient outcomes as secondary to shareholder returns, he explained, running a hand through his hair in a gesture reminiscent of his father. Everything? I built it to prevent. As his mother, I wanted to rage against the woman who had so systematically undermined my son's confidence and threatened his life's work. As an estate attorney with decades of experience, however, I recognized that emotional reactions would only complicate an already dangerous situation. Instead, I shifted fully into professional mode, focusing on the protective legal strategies that could secure his legacy regardless of how his personal situation evolved. Tell me exactly what outcome you want to ensure, regardless of what happens, with Angela or the company, I directed, pulling out the legal pad I had used throughout my career to document client wishes. We need to be absolutely clear about your priorities before we discuss specific mechanisms. Jeffrey's answer revealed that despite everything, the compassionate, thoughtful son I had raised remained intact beneath the exhaustion. I want my work to continue helping patients and researchers. I want the people who actually helped build the company to be protected. And I want you to be secure, Mom, because I know what Angela thinks of you and what she might do if anything happens to me. This last concern, for my well-being rather than his own, moved me deeply but didn't surprise me. Even under extreme duress, Jeffrey's fundamental character remained intact, concerned for others, focused on meaningful impact rather than personal benefit, and determined to protect the authentic purpose of his life's work. We can create structures to ensure all of those outcomes, I assured him, already mentally cataloging the legal instruments we would need. But Jeffrey, we should also discuss your personal safety and well-being. The situation you're describing has concerning implications beyond business control. He shook his head firmly, that familiar stubborn set to his jaw that I recognized from childhood. I'm not ready to leave, not while there's any chance of preserving what ConnectMed was meant to be. The technology is too important to too many patients. I just need to ensure that if anything happens, to me or to my position, the right protections are in place. The emphasis on, if anything happens, sent a chill through me, but I respected his agency as I would any client's. My role wasn't to force decisions, but to ensure his true wishes would be protected regardless of future circumstances. For the next month, we worked methodically to create a comprehensive estate plan that would protect Jeffrey's true legacy. We established a carefully constructed trust, that would maintain his controlling interest in the core intellectual property that powered his company's products. We documented the actual contributions of early employees and partners who had been systematically sidelined in Angela's revisionist corporate narrative. Most importantly, we created ironclad provisions for how his legacy should be managed if something happened to him. To maintain absolute confidentiality, we met only in my home office, always under the pretext of my helping Jeffrey organize his father's remaining academic papers, a task Angela had dismissed as sentimental and unnecessary, making it the perfect cover for our actual work. We used secure communication channels and kept all documentation in my office safe, rather than in digital formats that might be discovered. "She'll fight this," I warned him as we finalized the documents. "If your concerns about her motivations are accurate, this level of protection will be seen as a direct challenge to her control." "I know," Jeffrey acknowledged, a sad determination in his eyes. "But after watching Dad build his academic legacy with such integrity and seeing how you've helped so many families protect what matters most to them, I can't let my life's work become just another corporate asset to be leveraged for profit alone." The changes we implemented were subtle but significant, invisible to anyone not directly involved in a potential succession scenario, but absolutely crucial if such a situation arose. Jeffrey insisted on one unusual provision that I initially questioned from a legal standpoint, but ultimately accepted as an important psychological component of his planning. "If anything happens to me," he instructed, "I want these arrangements revealed only after Angela has had the opportunity to show her true priorities publicly. No preemptive disclosures, no matter what she might say or claim initially." I argued against this approach, pointing out that allowing misinformation to stand unchallenged even temporarily could create complications. But Jeffrey was adamant, his expression more resolute than I had seen in years. "I need to know who she really is when she believes there are no more constraints," he explained. "And others need to see it too, for their own protection going forward." Though uncomfortable with this approach, I recognized it as my son's explicit wish about his own legacy and documented it accordingly. Neither of us could have anticipated how quickly and tragically this provision would be tested. 3 weeks after we completed the revised estate plan, Jeffrey died in a private plane crash while returning from a client meeting in Boston. Angela had been scheduled to accompany him, but had canceled at the last minute due to what she described as more important meetings with investors. The small aircraft encountered unexpected severe weather over the Berkshire Mountains, and by the time search teams located the remote crash site, it was clear there had been no survivors. My son, my only child, was gone at just 40 years old. The news came via a cold, clinical phone call from Angela, not the authorities as would be customary. Her voice was steady, almost businesslike as she relayed the information. "Margaret, there's been an accident. Jeffrey's plane went down. There were no survivors." No preamble, no gentle preparation, just stark facts delivered with a detachment that struck me as profoundly wrong even through my initial shock. "I've identified the body," she continued before I could even process the first devastating blow. "The company is preparing a statement, and I'll handle the funeral arrangements. I assume you'll want to attend." That final phrase, "I assume you'll want to attend," as though my presence at my only child's funeral was optional rather than essential, should have triggered my suspicion immediately. But grief obliterates critical thinking. It floods the system with such overwhelming pain that analysis becomes impossible. It would be hours before I could begin to process the strangeness of her approach. The shock of losing Jeffrey, my brilliant, compassionate son who had already contributed more to the world in his 40 years than many achieve in much longer lives, was beyond anything I could have prepared for. The grief was physical, overwhelming, a constant pressure that made even breathing feel like an impossible task. Yet even through this devastating fog, my decades of professional experience helping others navigate loss provided a framework that kept me functioning when instinct told me to collapse. I had guided hundreds of clients through the practical aftermath of sudden loss. Now I applied that knowledge to my own shattered life, notifying Jeffrey's closest friends, contacting his father's remaining colleagues who had maintained connections with him, and gathering the documents we had so recently finalized. These mechanical tasks provided structure when my emotional world had none. Angela took control of the funeral arrangements immediately, positioning herself as the devastated widow who alone truly understood the significance of Jeffrey's life and work. Her public statements carefully crafted an image of inconsolable grief wrapped in stoic determination to continue his legacy. But in our limited private interactions, I observed none of the devastating emotional impact that accompanies genuine loss. No moments of collapse, no negotiating with reality, no waves of disbelief that characterize authentic grief. Instead, I witnessed a performance of bereavement, perfect in its external presentation but lacking the unpredictable emotional variations that cannot be controlled when genuine grief is present. Having counseled the bereaved for decades, I recognized the difference between true mourning and its strategic imitation. This realization sent a chill through me that temporarily cut through even my own overwhelming pain. The event she planned was less a memorial for my son than a corporate tribute to a visionary founder whose company would continue his legacy under the capable leadership already in place, meaning herself, though this wasn't stated explicitly. The guest list was dominated by investors, industry contacts, and potential business partners, with only token representation from Jeffrey's personal friends or academic colleagues who had supported his early research. Throughout the days leading up to the funeral, I was systematically marginalized, consulted perfunctorily about minor details, while all significant decisions were presented as already finalized. When I requested a small family gathering before the public memorial, Angela dismissed the idea as inefficient and reminded me that Jeffrey's real family was the company he built. This funeral needs to reassure investors and partners about continuity, she explained with barely concealed impatience when I suggested including more personal elements in the service. Jeffrey would want us focusing on protecting his company, not indulging in excessive sentimentality. This fundamental mischaracterization of my son, who had valued human connection above all else before Angela's influence, was painful, but not surprising, given what Jeffrey had shared during our final conversations. Following his wishes, I remained silent about our recent legal work, allowing Angela to orchestrate what had effectively become a corporate public relations event rather than a true celebration of Jeffrey's life. I focused instead on honoring my promise to him, allowing events to unfold naturally, without premature intervention, so that Angela's true character would be revealed to those who needed to see it. This required a restraint that tested the limits of my self-control, particularly as I watched her rewrite my son's story in real time. The funeral service itself was held at the Lakewood Executive Center rather than a church or community space. Despite Jeffrey's lifelong spiritual connection to the Unitarian congregation, where his father had been an active member, the setting was elaborate but strangely impersonal, filled with corporate branding, large photographs of Jeffrey in business settings rather than personal moments, and arrangements of sterile white lilies rather than the wildflowers he had always preferred. The attendees reflected Angela's priorities, front rows reserved for board members and major investors, with Jeffrey's lifelong friends and academic mentors relegated to back sections. I was seated in the front row but positioned at the far end, separated from Angela by 3 board members, a visual hierarchy that clearly communicated my secondary status in this carefully choreographed event. Most painful was the carefully curated presentation of Jeffrey's life story. Angela delivered a polished eulogy that erased his early years entirely, beginning with their meeting as though his life had only gained meaning through their partnership. His childhood compassion, his intellectual curiosity, his close relationship with his father, his volunteer work that had inspired his technological approach, All were omitted in favor of a narrative that positioned ConnectMed as his sole legacy and Angela as its essential guardian. Jeffrey often told me that meeting me was the turning point in his life, she claimed, her voice modulated to project both strength and vulnerability in perfect measure. That before our partnership, he had merely been creating interesting technology, without understanding its true market potential. This blatant fabrication, so contrary to everything I knew about my son's deeply held values and vision, required every ounce of my self-control to leave unchallenged. I felt Richard's absence acutely in that moment. He would have recognized the destructive power of allowing false narratives to stand uncorrected. Stories shape reality, he had often told his literature students. Control the story, and you. Control how people understand the world. Yet I had promised Jeffrey to allow this performance to play out fully, to give Angela the rope with which she would ultimately hang herself in the eyes of those who mattered. So I sat silent, my face carefully composed, as she rewrote my son's life into a corporate origin story with herself as the essential catalyst. After her carefully scripted performance, during the brief viewing period beside the closed casket, came the moment which would reveal Angela's true character exactly as Jeffrey had anticipated. With several board members and key investors nearby, close enough to hear but providing the illusion of a private exchange, she turned to me with an expression of calculated sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret," she began, her voice pitched to carry just far enough to be overheard by the strategically positioned witnesses, "I want you to know that despite Jeffrey's complicated feelings about your interference in our lives, I've arranged a modest monthly stipend for you. Nothing extravagant, of course, but enough to maintain your current lifestyle." Stunned by this complete fabrication of Jeffrey's feelings and the presumption about my financial needs, I remained silent, still honoring my son's request to allow events to unfold naturally. My silence apparently emboldened Angela, who continued with growing condescension. "After all," she added, her voice hardening slightly, "we both know you've been living off Jeffrey's success for years now. A woman your age with a failed law practice needs support, and I'm committed to honoring what Jeffrey would have wanted, despite your difficulties." This calculated attack, suggesting both that my successful career had been a failure and that I had been financially dependent on my son rather than independent, was designed to diminish me in the eyes of the influential witnesses while positioning Angela as magnanimous despite manufactured provocation. "It's the least I can do," she continued, her voice taking on a saccharine quality that poorly masked her contempt, "for someone who contributed so little yet expected so much. The board agrees that a modest stipend is appropriate for Jeffrey's mother, regardless of your parasitic behavior during his life." There it was, the word that would become pivotal in what followed. Parasite. A deliberate, calculated insult. Delivered with precision at the moment of my greatest vulnerability, designed to publicly diminish me while establishing her absolute control over my son's legacy and resources. The strategic brilliance of her approach was undeniable. By attacking me at my son's funeral, she created a situation where any defense I might offer would appear inappropriate to observers unaware of the broader context. Social convention prevents confrontation in funeral settings. Cultural expectations demand restraint from the bereaved. Angela was exploiting these norms to establish her narrative unchallenged. I felt the eyes of the board members and investors on us, saw their barely concealed discomfort at witnessing this exchange, yet noted their studied neutrality, unwilling to intervene in what appeared to be a family matter. Particularly when the aggressor was the CEO, they would continue working with after this uncomfortable moment passed. What Angela couldn't know was that this moment, this precise interaction, had been anticipated and planned for in the provisions Jeffrey and I had carefully crafted. His unusual insistence that his true wishes be revealed only after Angela had shown her hand publicly now made perfect sense. He had known exactly how she would behave when constraints were removed, had predicted with painful accuracy how she would treat his mother when she believed there were no consequences. I met her eyes directly, maintaining my dignity through absolute silence, refusing to give her the emotional reaction she clearly hoped to provoke. After a moment that stretched uncomfortably for all present, I simply placed my hand briefly on my son's casket and walked away, leaving Angela standing with the powerful witnesses who had observed her calculated cruelty. As I moved through the crowded reception area toward the side exit, I noted with grim satisfaction that several of Jeffrey's original team members and early supporters had witnessed the exchange as well. Dr. Elaine Chen, the research director who had first alerted Jeffrey to the concerning shifts in the company's direction, caught my eye briefly with an expression of sympathetic understanding, before carefully composing her features back to appropriate funeral solemnity. Outside in the parking area, I took my first deep breath since the confrontation. The chess game Jeffrey and I had set in motion was proceeding exactly as he had predicted. Angela had revealed her true character to precisely the witnesses who needed to see it, creating the foundation for what would come next. My son had always been a brilliant strategist, considering multiple moves ahead, a quality that had made him exceptional both as a programmer and as an ethical planner. I drove home in a strange, dual state of devastating grief and clinical detachment. The pain of Jeffrey's loss remained overwhelming, a physical presence that compressed my chest and blurred my vision. Yet alongside it ran a cold, clear current of purpose, the commitment to ensuring his true legacy would prevail despite Angela's machinations. At home, I found a voice message from Harold Kaufman, the senior partner at Kaufman, Westing & Moore, the prestigious firm that handled ConnectMed's legal affairs. His message was brief and formal. Mrs. Walsh, please be advised that a reading of your son's will and associated trust documents will take place tomorrow at 10 a.m. in our downtown offices. Ms. Pierce has been notified and will be present. Your attendance is requested as a named beneficiary. The timing was significant, less than 24 hours after the funeral, rather than the more typical week or two that usually separates these events. This suggested Angela had pushed for immediate confirmation of her control, eager to solidify her position with investors and the board. Her confidence that the legal documents would confirm her narrative was evident in this haste. What she couldn't know was that the documents filed with Kaufman, Westing & Moore 6 months earlier, the standard estate plan Jeffrey had created when they first married, had been quietly superseded by our recent work. The firm on record as handling ConnectMed's affairs was not the same one that now held Jeffrey's true final wishes. I spent that evening in careful preparation, reviewing the documentation we had created and confirming arrangements with Marjorie Silverman, the independent estate attorney Jeffrey had selected to handle his actual final directives. Unlike Harold Kaufman, who had been selected by Angela from her pharmaceutical industry contacts, Marjorie was known for her uncompromising ethical standards and expertise in contested estates. Everything is in order, Marjorie confirmed during our brief phone conversation. I'll arrive at Kaufman's office precisely at 10 a.m. with the certified documentation. Connecticut statutes are quite clear that the most recent properly executed will supersede all previous versions, regardless of which firm prepared them. That night, I allowed myself the private grief I had contained during the public performance of the funeral. In the silence of the home where Jeffrey had grown up, I moved through rooms filled with memories, his childhood science projects still carefully preserved in the basement, his high school debate trophies displayed in the living room cabinet, photographs documenting his growth from serious-eyed child to compassionate, brilliant man. The loss was incomprehensible, a void that could never be filled. Unlike Angela's performative grief, mine came in overwhelming waves that left me physically shaking. I curled on Jeffrey's childhood bed, still maintained in his old room, and allowed the full magnitude of his absence to wash over me. The knowledge that I would never again hear his voice, see his smile, or feel his arms around me in one of his characteristic bear hugs was a reality my mind struggled to accept. Yet even in this most private moment of devastation, I found clarity about what must come next. Jeffrey had trusted me to ensure his true legacy, both personal and professional. Tomorrow would determine whether the careful plans we had made together would succeed in protecting everything he had valued most. Morning came after a restless night of grief-interrupted sleep. I dressed with particular care in the charcoal gray suit I had worn for major court appearances throughout my career, an armor of professional competence rather than widow's weeds. Jeffrey had specifically requested I approach the will reading as the attorney you are, not just as my mother. His recognition of my professional capacity alongside my maternal role had been one of the many ways he honored both aspects of my identity. Kaufman. Westing and Moore occupied 3 floors of the High Ridge Tower downtown, their offices a calculated display of traditional legal prestige. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books lining built-in shelves, oil paintings of founding partners gazing sternly from heavy frames. The conference room where the will reading would take place carried the same atmosphere of established authority, designed to intimidate and impress clients in equal measure. When I arrived at 9:55 a.m., Angela was already seated at the massive conference table, flanked by 2 individuals I recognized as ConnectMed's chief financial officer and her personal attorney from her previous pharmaceutical position. Her expression upon seeing me combined surprise and barely disguised irritation. She had clearly not expected me to attend, despite the formal notification. "Margaret," she acknowledged coldly. "This is primarily a business matter concerning ConnectMed's leadership transition. I'm surprised you felt the need to attend rather than taking time to process your grief." The implication was clear. Legitimate mourning would preclude professional engagement, and my presence indicated insufficient maternal feeling rather than appropriate attention to my son's legacy. It was a calculated insult designed to undermine my standing before proceedings even began. "My son's wishes are my highest priority," I responded simply, taking a seat directly across from her. "Both his personal and professional legacy matter deeply to me." Harold Kaufman entered precisely at 10 a.m., accompanied by a junior associate carrying a slim folder that presumably contained the outdated will Angela was expecting to be read. Before introductions could even begin, the conference room door opened again to admit Marjorie Silverman, her commanding presence drawing all eyes immediately. At 68, Marjorie's reputation as one of the state's most formidable attorneys was well earned. Her precisely tailored suit, silver hair cut in a no-nonsense bob, and penetrating gaze all communicated absolute competence and unshakable ethical standards. She had been Jeffrey's deliberate choice for this moment, selected as much for her moral authority as for her legal expertise. "Harold," she greeted her colleague with professional courtesy, "I believe there's been a significant oversight in today's proceedings. My client, Jeffrey Walsh, executed a new will and comprehensive trust documents 4 weeks ago that supersede anything currently in your possession." The momentary confusion in Harold Kaufman's expression confirmed what Jeffrey had suspected. Angela had kept him uninformed about any changes in their personal or professional relationship, maintaining the facade of unified purpose even with their legal counsel. "I have no record of any updated documents," Harold responded, glancing uncertainly at Angela, whose face had gone absolutely still in a way that confirmed she had not anticipated this development. "The documents were executed through my firm, precisely because Mr. Walsh wished them to remain confidential until after his death," Marjorie explained, placing a sealed legal envelope on the table. "I have here the original will, trust documentation, and certificate of independent medical examination confirming Mr. Walsh's mental competence at the time of signing, along with video recording of the execution with witnesses, all properly notarized and filed with the probate court yesterday afternoon." Angela's carefully composed expression fractured for just an instant, revealing a flash of something cold and calculating, before her features rearranged into a mask of confusion and grief. "This is the first I'm hearing of any new will," she said, her voice taking on a tremulous quality that hadn't been present moments before. "Jeffrey and I made all important decisions together. There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake," Marjorie stated firmly. Mr. Walsh was explicitly clear about his wishes and his reasons for executing these documents without your knowledge. The will is properly witnessed, notarized, and entirely legally binding. Harold Kaufman, visibly uncomfortable with this unexpected development, examined the documentation Marjorie provided. After several minutes of careful review, he conceded the obvious. "The execution appears to be in proper order. Connecticut law is clear that the most recent validly executed will take precedence." Angela's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear, likely explaining that challenging the will would require proving either incompetence or undue influence. Difficult claims to sustain given the independent medical examination and video documentation Jeffrey had presciently arranged. "I believe we should proceed with reading the actual operative will," Marjorie suggested with the calm authority that had made her so effective in contentious situations throughout her career. Harold, recognizing both his professional obligation and the potential liability in proceeding with an outdated document when a valid newer will had been presented, nodded reluctantly. "Yes, of course. Ms. Silverman, would you care to do the honors since you were the drafting attorney?" "Actually," Marjorie replied, "Mr. Walsh left specific instructions about this as well. He requested that his mother, Margaret Walsh, as a licensed attorney familiar with both his personal wishes and the legal implications of his estate plan, conduct the reading." This unexpected development shifted the power dynamic in the room instantly. Rather than a marginalized grieving mother, I was suddenly positioned in my professional capacity, precisely as Jeffrey had intended. The strategic brilliance of this approach was that it prevented Angela from dismissing the will's contents as the result of my undue influence as his mother, since Marjorie remained the attorney of record who had drafted and executed the documents. Angela's face drained of color as she realized the implications of this arrangement. "This is highly irregular," her attorney objected. "Mrs. Walsh is hardly a disinterested party." "On the contrary," Marjorie countered smoothly, "Connecticut law has no requirement that the reader of a will be disinterested, only that the will itself be properly executed, which this one unquestionably is. Mr. Walsh's wishes regarding the reading are clearly documented in his letter of instruction to my firm." Harold Kaufman, increasingly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to challenge the clear legal standing of the documents, gestured for me to proceed. "Please, Mrs. Walsh." With hands that were remarkably steady despite the emotional magnitude of the moment, I accepted the sealed envelope from Marjorie. Inside was my son's last communication to those assembled, the culmination of our careful planning and his final protection of the values and work that had defined his life. I took a moment to center myself, drawing on decades of courtroom experience, to project the professional authority this moment required. When I spoke, my voice was clear and strong, carrying the weight of both legal certification and maternal determination to honor my son's true legacy. "Last will and testament of Jeffrey Richard Walsh," I began, maintaining steady eye contact with Angela across the polished expanse of the conference table. "I, Jeffrey Richard Walsh, being of sound mind and under no constraint or undue influence, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The standard legal preamble gave no hint of the bombshell. Provisions to follow. Angela maintained her performance of bereaved confusion, but the tension in her shoulders and the tightness around her eyes revealed her growing awareness that her carefully constructed plans were in jeopardy. "To my wife, Angela Pierce Walsh," I continued, watching her lean forward slightly in anticipation of the control she still expected to receive. "I leave the following: our personal residence at 478 Lakewood Heights and its contents, with the exception of specific items designated below. The sum of $1 million to be paid in a single lump sum. And my sincere hope that you will find happiness pursuing your own ambitions rather than controlling those of others. The gasp from Angela was audible in the suddenly silent room. $1 million was a substantial sum by normal standards, but represented only a tiny fraction of Jeffrey's considerable estate and, most significantly, included no ownership or control of ConnectMed or its intellectual property. Before she could recover enough to object, I continued reading. Having witnessed the gradual transformation of our marriage from partnership to control, and the parallel shift in the company I founded from its mission of collaborative medical advancement to profit-driven exploitation, I have been forced to take measures to protect both my personal legacy and the original purpose of ConnectMed's technology. Angela's performance of confused grief dissolved entirely, replaced by open fury. "This is preposterous," she interrupted. "Jeffrey would never—" "Please allow Mrs. Walsh to complete the reading without interruption," Marjorie interjected firmly. "You'll have ample opportunity to respond afterward," I continued, my voice strengthening as I read the words Jeffrey and I had crafted together during those final, painful weeks of his life. "To ensure ConnectMed's technology continues to serve its original purpose of accelerating medical research collaboration, particularly for rare and neglected diseases, I hereby establish the Walsh Collaborative Medicine Trust, which will hold controlling interest in all intellectual property developed, by me or under my direction." What followed was a carefully constructed firewall between Angela and the company's core technology and mission, the culmination of our painstaking legal work to protect everything Jeffrey valued most. The trust would be governed by a board, consisting of Dr. Elaine Chen, 2 other original research team members, a patient advocacy representative, and me as Jeffrey's personal representative. The trust is explicitly chartered to prioritize medical impact over profit maximization, ensuring that ConnectMed's technology remains accessible to researchers working on rare diseases and underserved medical conditions. While commercial applications may be licensed to generate sustainable funding, such applications must never compromise the core mission of accelerating collaborative medical research. Angela's attorney was frantically taking notes, presumably already planning potential challenges, but the independent medical examination and video documentation of Jeffrey's signing made traditional grounds for contesting the will, incompetence or undue influence, extremely difficult to pursue. "To my mother, Margaret Walsh," I continued, my voice wavering slightly for the first time as I encountered the personal bequest, "I leave the remainder of my financial assets outside of ConnectMed, with the request that she use these resources to support the legal defense of the trust should its mission or control be challenged. Mom, your wisdom about both legal protection and ethical legacy has been my guiding light. Everything worthwhile I've created reflects the values you and Dad instilled in me." The personal message, included against my objections but insisted upon by Jeffrey, brought unexpected tears to my eyes despite my determination to maintain professional composure. I paused briefly to collect myself before continuing with the most devastating section of the will. "To the board members and investors of ConnectMed," I read, my voice regaining its strength, "I offer both an apology and an explanation. In recent months, I have observed with growing concern the direction in which the company has been led, away from our founding mission of collaborative medical advancement and toward profit maximization at the expense of patient benefit." The CFO shifted uncomfortably in his chair as I continued reading Jeffrey's meticulously documented concerns about specific strategic decisions, including dated references to board presentations where research priorities had been shifted without transparent disclosure of the potential impact on rare disease collaborations. While I bear responsibility for not opposing these changes more effectively during my life, I am exercising my right as founder and majority intellectual property holder to ensure ConnectMed's technology cannot be diverted from its intended purpose after my death. The trust established by this will maintains legal control of all core algorithms and collaborative frameworks I personally developed. Angela's face had transformed completely from the composed, grieving widow of the funeral to a mask of cold fury. "This is nothing but vindictive jealousy," she hissed, abandoning any pretense of bereaved confusion. Jeffrey was becoming increasingly erratic in his final months, professionally paranoid and emotionally unstable. "On the contrary," I responded, setting aside the will momentarily to address her directly as both attorney and mother. Jeffrey was thinking with remarkable clarity about his legacy and the protection of his life's work. He anticipated exactly this reaction, which is why he arranged for independent medical evaluation immediately before executing these documents. I gestured to Marjorie, who removed from her briefcase a sealed medical report. Dr. Raymond Thorne, a nationally recognized psychiatric evaluator with no previous connection to either Jeffrey or our family, conducted a comprehensive evaluation specifically to address potential future claims of the exact nature you're suggesting. The strategic brilliance of this preparation, Jeffrey's foresight in documenting his mental competence and rational decision-making process, effectively closed one of the few avenues Angela might have used to challenge the will. Her attorney's grimace confirmed this assessment. I returned to the will's final provisions, which addressed the company's operational future with surgical precision. While Angela Pierce Walsh may continue as CEO of ConnectMed's commercial division, if the board so chooses, all licensing of core technology will require approval from the trust board to ensure alignment with the company's original mission. Additionally, all current employee stock options are hereby accelerated to immediate vesting, and the enclosed sealed letters should be delivered to each named recipient. These letters, personal messages Jeffrey had written to key team members, contained his private apologies for allowing the company's mission to be compromised and his encouragement for them to help restore its original purpose through their continued work with the newly established trust. As I completed the reading, the room remained in stunned silence. The will Jeffrey and I had crafted together had effectively severed Angela's automatic control of his life's work while preserving the company's ability to operate under ethical constraints. More significantly, it had publicly documented the concerns he had shared with me privately about the direction Angela had been taking both the company and their relationship. Angela broke the silence with cold precision. "I'll contest this, of course. No jury will believe Jeffrey would make such dramatic changes without discussing them with his wife. This has your fingerprints all over it, Margaret." "You're certainly entitled to contest the will," Marjorie responded before I could. "However, I should note that Connecticut has particularly strong protections against frivolous challenges to valid wills. The documentation of Mr. Walsh's competence, the video record of his signing statement outlining his specific concerns, and the testimony of the two witnesses who have provided sealed affidavits would make such a challenge not only unlikely to succeed, but potentially costly in both financial and reputational terms." The implication was clear. Pursuing a public challenge would require Angela to openly dispute Jeffrey's documented concerns about her behavior and business decisions, a process that would expose precisely the issues he had raised about the company's shifting priorities away from patient benefit toward profit maximization. Harold Kaufman, visibly uncomfortable with the entire situation, cleared his throat. "Perhaps it would be advisable to consider the terms carefully before making decisions about potential litigation. Contested wills rarely benefit any party involved." Angela stood abruptly, gathering her belongings with sharp, angry movements. "This isn't over. Jeffrey built that company with me. Everyone knows his technical ideas would never have become a viable business without my direction." "Actually," I replied calmly, "Jeffrey built ConnectMed based on research he began years before meeting you, with a vision of collaborative medicine that was always meant to prioritize patient outcomes over profit margins. Today's provisions simply ensure that original vision remains protected." Her eyes met mine with undisguised hatred. "You've been jealous of our success from the beginning. A washed-up attorney living through your son because your own career was unremarkable. Exactly the parasite I named you as yesterday. The venom in her voice confirmed everything Jeffrey had feared about how she would behave when constraints were removed. The calculated cruelty, the dismissiveness toward others' contributions, the fundamental misunderstanding of what had motivated my son's life and work. I've been an advocate for my son's true legacy, I corrected quietly. Not the corporate valuation you prioritized, but the integrity and purpose that defined his work from the beginning. Something you seem to have never understood about him. As Angela stormed from the conference room, followed quickly by her attorney, and the CFO, I felt a complex mixture of grief, vindication, and profound sadness. The outcome Jeffrey and I had planned for had been achieved. His true legacy protected, Angela's control limited, the original mission of his life's work preserved. Yet the victory felt hollow in the face of his permanent absence. Marjorie gathered her documents with practiced efficiency. That went as expected, she noted. The provisions are legally sound. She may attempt a challenge, but the documentation we prepared makes success highly unlikely. Jeffrey thought she might respond this way, I acknowledged. The weight of loss. Temporarily overwhelming the professional satisfaction of seeing our careful planning succeed. He wanted her true character to be visible to those who needed to see it. Harold Kaufman, looking distinctly uncomfortable with the entire proceeding, muttered something about needing to consult with the firm's probate specialists before hurrying from the room. His divided loyalties, between the firm's ongoing relationship with ConnectMed and his professional obligation to honor legally executed documents, had been made painfully evident throughout the reading. Left alone in the conference room, I finally allowed myself a moment of both grief and gratitude. Grief for the son whose physical presence I would never experience again, and gratitude that his true legacy would continue despite the efforts to reshape it into something he had never intended. As I gathered my belongings to leave, my phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from Dr. Elaine Chen, whose witness to Angela's funeral behavior had been no coincidence, but rather a carefully orchestrated element of Jeffrey's planning. Meeting concluded. Board members witnessed everything. Angela's true priorities, now clearly visible to all key decision-makers. Jeffrey's wisdom extends beyond his life. This confirmation, that the strategic exposure of Angela's character had achieved its intended effect with those who held influence over ConnectMed's future, brought a sad smile to my face. My brilliant son had planned his protection moves, meticulously, anticipating reactions and counter-moves with the same strategic brilliance that had characterized his technological innovations. Outside the imposing High Ridge Tower, I paused on the steps, looking up at the clear blue October sky. So, at odds with the emotional turbulence of the past weeks. The chess game Jeffrey and I had planned together had reached its conclusion. His legacy was protected, his true purpose preserved. The hollow victory couldn't fill the permanent void his absence created, but it honored the values that had defined his life. As I walked to my car, I reflected on the cruel irony that had necessitated this complex legal maneuvering in the first place. Jeffrey had created technology specifically designed to foster genuine collaboration in medical research, yet his personal life had become dominated by someone who viewed relationships as competitive rather than collaborative. He had valued transparency and shared purpose, yet found himself married to a woman who prioritized control and personal advancement above all else. In the days that followed, Angela did indeed consult with several prominent estate attorneys about challenging the will. However, as Marjorie had predicted, the thorough documentation Jeffrey had arranged, including the independent psychiatric evaluation, video recording of his signing statement outlining specific concerns, and sealed witness affidavits, made the prospect of successful litigation remote. More significantly, Angela's aggressive approach at the funeral and will reading had alienated key board members whose support she would have needed for any effective challenge. Jeffrey's sealed letters to original team members had further consolidated support for maintaining the trust's control of core technology, as these communications revealed his genuine regret at allowing the company's mission to be compromised, and his hope that they would help restore its original purpose. 2 weeks after the will reading, Angela reached out through her attorney to propose a settlement. She would accept the will's provisions without challenge in exchange for remaining. As CEO of the commercial division, the trust board, on my recommendation as Jeffrey's representative, accepted this arrangement with specific performance requirements tied to maintaining alignment with the company's original mission. This resolution, allowing Angela to maintain professional standing while ensuring Jeffrey's technology remained dedicated to its intended purpose, represented exactly the balanced approach my son had hoped to achieve. Not vindictive punishment, but appropriate constraints. Not personal revenge, but mission protection. In the quiet of my home that evening, surrounded by photographs documenting Jeffrey's journey from serious-eyed child to compassionate innovator, I felt his presence more strongly than at any point since his death. Not as supernatural visitation, but as the living legacy of values we had shared. The belief that integrity matters more than advantage, that purpose transcends profit, that relationships should be collaborative rather than exploitative. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered to his smiling image from ConnectMed's launch day, before Angela, when his eyes still shone with undiluted purpose. "Your work will continue exactly as you intended." The grief remained overwhelming, a permanent alteration to my existence rather than a temporary state to be overcome. No legal victory could fill the void left by my child's death. Yet alongside this devastating loss ran a thread of deep satisfaction that his true legacy would endure. Not just the technology he created, but the values that had inspired it. The woman who had called me a parasite at my son's funeral had discovered a fundamental truth. Genuine legacy isn't measured in assets controlled or authority wielded, but in values transmitted and purposes protected. By those measures, the relationship between Jeffrey and me, built on mutual respect, shared values, and collaborative support, had created a legacy that would outlast all attempts to diminish or control it. As night fell, I sat in Richard's old reading chair, surrounded by the books he had loved and the life we had built together, holding the letter Jeffrey had left specifically for me, separate from the will and its legal provisions. His handwriting, so like his father's, brought both pain and comfort as I unfolded the pages. "Mom," he had written, "if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to our plan, though in the worst possible circumstances. I want you to know that preparing for this possibility with you these past weeks has been a strange gift in its own way. A chance to ensure my work continues with its true purpose intact. But more importantly, a chance to tell you what I couldn't always express in our daily lives. You and Dad gave me the greatest gift parents can offer, a moral compass that never wavers no matter how complex the circumstances. While I lost my way temporarily under Angela's influence, allowing ConnectMed to drift from its founding mission, your quiet example of principled living eventually helped me see what was happening and take steps to correct it. I know the coming months will be unimaginably difficult for you. Grief is the price we pay for love, as you told me after Dad died. But please find comfort in knowing that the values you and Dad instilled in me will continue to shape the world through the trust we've created together. My physical presence ends, but the purpose you helped me discover continues," Angela called. "You a parasite once in my hearing, a cruel assessment that shocked me into beginning to see the truth about what our relationship had become. The reality, as you and I both know, is exactly the opposite. You have never taken, you have only given. Wisdom, support, love without conditions or expectations. If that makes you a parasite, then the word has lost all meaning. In these final, private words to you, I want to thank you for being exactly the mother I needed throughout my life, but especially during these recent difficult months. Your strength gave me courage. Your legal brilliance gave me hope. Your unwavering love gave me the clarity to protect what matters most. All my love always, Jeffrey." The tears came freely now, Not the ravaging sobs of fresh grief, but the bittersweet acknowledgement of a love that transcended even death. In these words, I found not just comfort, but confirmation that the values Richard and I had tried to instill had indeed taken root and flourished, even through the difficult final chapter of Jeffrey's life. Sleep eventually came, and with it, the first measure of peace I had experienced since learning of Jeffrey's death. The path ahead remained shrouded in grief's heavy fog, but it was illuminated by purpose, the continuation of Jeffrey's mission through the trust we had established together, and the preservation of his true legacy. Morning brought practical concerns that demanded attention. As Jeffrey's named executor and the primary trustee of the newly established Walsh Collaborative Medicine Trust, I had significant responsibilities to fulfill. Where grief might have overwhelmed me without direction, these duties provided structure and purpose that helped navigate the devastating loss. Dr. Elaine Chen arrived at my home at 9, bringing not just the professional expertise needed for the Trust's scientific oversight, but the personal connection of someone who had truly understood and shared Jeffrey's vision from its earliest days. "I hope you don't mind meeting here rather than the office," I greeted her, gesturing toward the dining room table I had arranged with the necessary documents. "I'm not quite ready to face ConnectMed's headquarters yet." "Of course," she replied with genuine warmth. Jeffrey always said some of his best thinking happened right at this table, surrounded by his parents' books. It seems fitting to begin rebuilding his vision here. This casual mention of how Jeffrey had spoken about his childhood home, something I hadn't known he shared with colleagues, brought fresh tears to my eyes. Elaine graciously pretended not to notice, focusing instead on the papers before us. "The technical team is completely behind the Trust's mission," she reported. Angela's behavior at both the funeral and will reading confirmed everything Jeffrey had told us about the direction she was pushing the company. Even board members who were initially swayed by her business projections are reconsidering their positions. For the next several hours, we worked methodically through the Trust's immediate priorities, securing the core intellectual property, establishing clear guidelines for its ethical application, and communicating with the research institutions that had been the original beneficiaries of ConnectMed's collaborative platform. Jeffrey left detailed technical documentation about the alternative applications he was developing before Angela began redirecting resources, Elaine explained, showing me schematics I could only partially comprehend. These approaches specifically address rare disease research challenges without the commercialization compromises that were being implemented. The trust Jeffrey had established was ingeniously constructed to balance pragmatic sustainability with ethical mission protection. Commercial applications would be permitted, necessary even for financial viability, but only when they didn't undermine the core purpose of accelerating collaborative research for underserved medical needs. "It's exactly what he originally intended," Elaine noted, her voice reflecting both professional admiration and personal grief. "He created this technology to honor what happened to his roommate in college, David Chen, who died from a rare immune disorder that might have been treatable if research hadn't been siloed across different institutions." This reference to David Chen, a name I recognized from Jeffrey's MIT years but whose story I hadn't known was so directly connected to ConnectMed's origins, revealed yet another dimension of my son's compassionate motivation that he had never explicitly shared with me. Always modest about his deeper purposes, he had explained his technology in technical terms rather than emotional ones, even to his mother. "I didn't know that was the specific catalyst," I admitted. "Jeffrey mentioned wanting to improve research, collaboration, but he never told me it began with losing a friend." Elaine nodded understanding. That was Jeffrey, deeply motivated by personal connection, but never using those connections for emotional leverage or narrative advantage. So different from... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The contrast with Angela's approach, leveraging every personal story for maximum strategic advantage, hung in the air between us. Over the following weeks, a remarkable transformation occurred at ConnectMed. With the Trust's clear directives and the protection of Jeffrey's core technology now legally established, original team members who had been marginalized under Angela's leadership began reasserting the company's founding principles. Research. Collaborations that had been deprioritized were reestablished. Technological features that served rare disease researchers but had limited commercial potential were redeveloped. Angela remained as CEO of the commercial division as our settlement had specified, but her authority was now properly balanced by the Trust's oversight of core technology applications. Surprisingly, once the battle for absolute control was definitively lost, she proved reasonably effective within these new constraints, her business acumen valuable when properly directed toward ethical applications of the technology. "She's actually doing solid work now that the parameters are clear," Marjorie Silverman observed during our one-month review meeting. Apparently knowing she can't change the rules has made her focus on playing the game well within them. This pragmatic adaptation reflected something Jeffrey had told me during our planning sessions. Angela isn't evil, Mom. She's just oriented toward control and personal advancement above all else. With proper structural constraints, her talents can still benefit the company's mission without compromising its soul. His capacity for this balanced assessment, recognizing both Angela's genuine skills and her fundamental limitations, demonstrated a wisdom beyond his years. Where I might have been tempted toward vindictive exclusion after her treatment of both Jeffrey and me, he had constructed a solution that contained her harmful tendencies while still utilizing her genuine abilities. 3. Months after the will reading, I attended my first ConnectMed board meeting as the Trust's primary representative. Walking into the company headquarters, the physical manifestation of Jeffrey's vision and the site of both his greatest professional achievements and most painful personal compromises required all my professional composure. Angela and I acknowledged each other with cool civility, maintaining the carefully structured détente our settlement had established. Neither of us pretended grief had created a bond between us, but neither did we allow personal animosity to interfere with the company's functioning. Jeffrey would have approved of this practical approach. The meeting itself revealed how thoroughly the company culture was returning to its original mission under the Trust's guidance. Research collaborations had increased 40% in just 3 months. Partnerships with rare disease advocacy organizations had been reestablished. And perhaps most significantly, the technical team was once again innovating around patient needs rather than solely commercial applications. The Walsh Collaborative Medicine Trust has approved funding for the Pediatric Rare Disease Initiative, I announced, presenting the Trust Board's first major financial commitment. This will extend ConnectMed's platform specifically for research. Institutions working on childhood-onset conditions with limited commercial potential but significant patient impact. The initiative, one Jeffrey had originally conceived but had been unable to implement under Angela's commercially focused direction, represented exactly the kind of work the Trust had been established to support. Named the David Chen Memorial Research Initiative, in honor of the friend whose loss had inspired ConnectMed's original mission, it would create specialized collaborative tools for pediatric researchers worldwide. As I presented the details of the initiative, I felt Jeffrey's presence not as supernatural visitation, but as living legacy, his values and vision continuing to shape the world even after his physical absence. The trust we had established together wasn't just a legal entity, but the embodiment of his true purpose, now protected from those who would have redirected it toward less worthy ends. Angela remained silent during my presentation, her expression unreadable. When the discussion opened for questions, she surprised me with her first direct address since the will reading. The commercial division can contribute matching funds for technology implementation, she offered, her tone professionally neutral. While the research itself may not have immediate profit potential, the methodologies developed could enhance our enterprise offerings as well. This practical suggestion, finding mutual benefit between mission and commercial interests rather than positioning them as competitors, reflected a shift in approach that suggested Angela was adapting to the new reality more constructively than I had anticipated. Perhaps having clear boundaries had actually liberated her to apply her genuine business talents without the distortion of absolute control. After the meeting, as board members dispersed to their various departments, I found myself alone in Jeffrey's former office, maintained as a kind of memorial with his awards, degrees, and personal items still in place. The space reflected his dual nature: rigorous technical diagrams and research papers organized alongside photographs of patients whose lives had been improved through treatments discovered via his collaborative platform. Dr. Chen found me there, hesitating in the doorway until I gestured her in. "We've kept it exactly as he left it," she explained. "The team needed that connection to his original vision during the transition." Running my fingers across his desk, the same antique walnut piece that had been Richard's during his university days, I felt the strange duality of devastating absence alongside continuing purpose. Jeffrey was gone, yet his work continued. His physical presence lost, yet his vision more securely established than ever. "He would be pleased," I said simply, looking at the latest research statistics displayed on the wall monitor. Visual confirmation that the mission he had fought to protect was now flourishing. Not triumphant or vindicated, but genuinely pleased that the work continues as intended. "That's exactly what he cared about," Elaine agreed. "Not who got credit or who had control, just that the technology helped the people it was designed to help." This simple truth, that Jeffrey's ultimate concern had been impact rather than attribution, stood in such stark contrast to Angela's approach that it highlighted exactly why our intervention had been necessary. Where she sought control, he had sought contribution. Where she measured success through authority, he measured it through lives improved. 6 months after Jeffrey's death, the Walsh Collaborative Medicine Trust had become recognized throughout the medical research community as a model for ethical technology development, balancing necessary business sustainability with unwavering commitment to humanitarian purpose. Articles in medical journals and technology publications highlighted the Trust's innovative approach to preserving mission-driven focus within a competitive industry landscape. Angela, to her credit, had found a workable accommodation within the DIL new structure. With fundamental control no longer a possibility, she had redirected her considerable talents toward excellence within defined parameters. The commercial division under her leadership performed well, generating sustainable funding for the Trust's mission-focused initiatives without attempting to redirect them. Our personal relationship remained exactly what it needed to be: professionally cordial, emotionally distant, pragmatically focused on respective areas of responsibility. We did not pretend forgiveness or reconciliation. Some breaches cannot and should not be papered over with false harmony. But neither did we allow past conflicts to interfere with the functioning of the organization Jeffrey had created. In private moments, I sometimes wondered if Angela ever reflected on the irony of our situation. Her attempt to position me as a parasite at Jeffrey's funeral had catalyzed precisely the revelation of his true wishes that limited her control. Her cruelty in that vulnerable moment, the word she had chosen as a weapon, had ultimately facilitated the protection of Jeffrey's legacy from her own distorting influence. If she recognized this irony, she never acknowledged it. Perhaps in her worldview, where control and personal advantage remained primary values, she simply calculated that optimal adaptation to immutable constraints represented the best available strategy. Or perhaps, though I considered this less likely, she had gained some perspective on the damage her approach had caused to both Jeffrey's vision and potentially to Jeffrey himself. 1 year after the funeral, I visited Jeffrey's grave alone, bringing the wildflowers he had always preferred over formal arrangements. The Pediatric Rare Disease Initiative bearing David Chen's name had just published its first major research breakthrough, a collaborative discovery involving 7 institutions across 3 continents that promised new treatment approaches for a previously neglected condition affecting fewer than 5,000 children worldwide. "It's working exactly as you intended," I told him, arranging the flowers against his simple headstone. "The technology is serving its true purpose, helping exactly the researchers and patients you designed it for." The grief remained, a permanent alteration to my life rather than a temporary condition to be overcome, but alongside it had grown a profound sense of purpose and continuity. The trust Jeffrey and I had established together had successfully protected both his personal legacy and his professional mission, ensuring that the values that had guided his life continued to shape his contributions even after his death. As I stood to leave, a familiar figure appeared at the cemetery gates, Dr. Elaine Chen, carrying her own bouquet of wildflowers. Our shared commitment to Jeffrey's vision had gradually evolved into genuine friendship, connected by mutual understanding of both his brilliance and his fundamental goodness. The board approved the international expansion of the Chen Initiative, she called as she approached. Full implementation across research institutions in 17 developing countries, exactly as Jeffrey originally proposed. This development, the global extension of collaborative tools to regions typically excluded from cutting-edge research resources, represented the fulfillment of one of Jeffrey's most cherished goals. He had always insisted that medical knowledge should transcend economic and geographic boundaries, particularly for conditions affecting vulnerable populations. He would consider that the true measure of success, I replied, making space for her beside the grave. Not market share or valuation, but genuine impact where it's needed most. Together we stood in companionable silence, 2 women who had understood different dimensions of the same remarkable man, his technical genius and his moral purpose, now united in ensuring both aspects of his legacy continued to flourish in balance. The woman who had called me a parasite at my son's funeral had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of genuine legacy. It isn't transmitted through control or domination, but through values embodied and purposes protected. By those measures, the relationship Jeffrey and I had shared, mutually supportive, ethically aligned, focused on contribution rather than control, had created ripples that would continue spreading long after both our lives had ended. In that quiet cemetery, surrounded by evidence that life is temporary but impact can endure, I found a measure of peace that had seemed impossible. In those first devastating days after Jeffrey's death, the void of his absence remained unfillable, but the purpose we had shared continued. His vision protected, his values perpetuated, his true legacy secured. The trust we had established together, both the legal entity and the deeper trust between mother and son, had proven stronger than those who sought to control or diminish it. In that enduring strength lay not just consolation for overwhelming loss, but confirmation of what matters most. Not power, but purpose. Not control, but contribution. Not dominance, but legacy. The woman who had called me a parasite would never understand. That genuine inheritance isn't primarily about assets transferred but values transmitted. In that deeper, truer sense, Jeffrey remained present in every life improved through the work we had protected together. A legacy no will contest could ever diminish and no power play could ever control. 5 years after Jeffrey's death, I found myself standing at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Westbrook Medical Research Center, addressing the inaugural Walsh Collaborative Medicine Conference. Hundreds of researchers, physicians, and patient advocates had gathered to share breakthroughs made possible through the collaborative platform Jeffrey had created and the trust had protected. When my son founded ConnectMed, I began, my voice steady despite the emotion this milestone stirred. He envisioned technology that would transcend traditional barriers in medical research. Today, as I look around this room at researchers from dozens of countries sharing discoveries, I see his vision fully realized. The statistics I shared next, 12 new treatments for rare diseases approved, research efficiency increased by 40% through elimination of duplicative efforts, represented the measurable manifestation of Jeffrey's original purpose. Each number translated to relieved suffering, extended lives, and hope restored for patients previously neglected due to the rarity of their conditions. As I concluded my remarks to warm applause, I noticed a familiar figure standing at the back of the ballroom. Angela Pierce, she had resumed her maiden name 2 years earlier after leaving ConnectMed, was observing the proceedings with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Her presence at this celebration of the mission she had once attempted to redirect was unexpected. After the formal proceedings concluded, as attendees mingled during the reception, Angela approached me directly for the first time in nearly 3 years. Time had changed her physically little, but something in her demeanor had shifted subtly. The calculating hardness that had once characterized her expressions had softened into something less certain. "Margaret," she acknowledged with a small nod. "Congratulations on the conference. It's impressive what the Trust has accomplished." The awkwardness between us was palpable. Too much history, too much harm done for casual conversation. Yet her presence suggested some purpose beyond. "Mere curiosity. Thank you," I responded neutrally. "What brings you here today?" She glanced around at the enthusiastic researchers sharing discoveries across institutional boundaries, exactly the collaborative environment Jeffrey had envisioned, but that she had once considered economically inefficient. "I've been following the results," she admitted after a moment's hesitation. "The Chen Initiative's pediatric treatment protocol made international headlines last month. Even at Westbrook Pharmaceuticals, people took notice." This acknowledgement that the mission-driven approach she had once dismissed as financially naive had produced results significant enough to capture industry attention seemed to cost her some effort. "Jeffrey would be pleased that the work continues as he intended," I replied, maintaining professional composure despite the complex emotions her presence evoked. A flash of something, regret, recognition, crossed her face briefly. "Yes, I've come to understand that about him more clearly in retrospect. At the time, I interpreted his focus on mission over profit as business naivety. I didn't recognize it as deliberate values prioritization. This insight, that what she had perceived as commercial inexperience had actually been conscious ethical choice, suggested a level of reflection I hadn't expected from her. Jeffrey always understood the business realities, I corrected gently. He simply refused to let them become the primary drivers of decision-making when human welfare was at stake. Angela nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the large portrait of Jeffrey that dominated the entrance to the ballroom. For a moment, I glimpsed genuine regret in her expression. "I've been offered a position heading a new collaborative research initiative at Westbrook," she said finally. They were impressed by the efficiency metrics the Trust has published. Apparently, even purely commercial enterprises are recognizing the value of structured collaboration over absolute competition. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that the approach she had resisted within ConnectMed was now being adopted by mainstream pharmaceutical companies, including her current employer. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, the words clearly difficult for her. "What I said at Jeffrey's funeral was inexcusable, regardless of the circumstances." This unexpected acknowledgement, coming 5 years after the devastating moment beside Jeffrey's casket, caught me by surprise. Angela had never been one to admit error or express regret. "Why now?" I asked directly. She considered this question carefully before responding. "Because watching what you've built with the Trust forced me to reconsider many of my assumptions. The collaborative approach I dismissed as idealistic has proven extraordinarily effective." She hesitated before adding, "And because I've recently experienced loss myself. My father died last year after a lengthy illness. His condition was one of those the Chen Initiative recently published protocols for. Too late for him, but the treatment approach might have extended his quality of life, had it been available sooner. This connection, that her own family might have benefited from the very research collaborations she had once deprioritized, represented a profound irony neither of us could miss. "I understand that perspective better now," she acknowledged. "At Westbrook, I've been advocating for a hybrid approach that balances necessary profitability with broader access models." Our conversation was interrupted by the approach of Dr. Chen, who eyed Angela with understandable wariness. The moment of unexpected connection broken, Angela nodded a brief goodbye. "The trust is doing important work," she said as she turned to leave. "Jeffrey would be proud of what you've built from his vision." This acknowledgement, recognition that the mission-protective approach she had once opposed had proven more valuable than her commercially focused alternative, represented not reconciliation, but something perhaps more meaningful: vindication of the principles Jeffrey and I had fought to protect. 10 years after Jeffrey's death, the Walsh Collaborative Medicine Trust had evolved from protective mechanism to innovative driver of research methodologies globally. The annual conference had grown from modest gathering to major international event, attracting participants from 6 continents. The collaborative platform now facilitated over 800 research partnerships focused on conditions traditional market forces often neglected. Most significantly, measurable outcomes confirmed the approach's effectiveness. 37 new treatments approved through regulatory pathways. Research efficiency increased by 60% through elimination of duplicative efforts. And development costs reduced sufficiently to make therapies economically viable for conditions affecting small patient populations. On the 10th anniversary of Jeffrey's death, I visited his grave alone, as had become my annual tradition. The acute grief of those early years had gradually transformed into something different, not diminished in significance, but changed in quality. The pain of his absence remained, but alongside it had grown profound gratitude for both the years we had shared and the legacy we had protected together. "The Chen Initiative is expanding to 50 countries next year," I told him, arranging wildflowers against his simple headstone. "The pediatric treatment protocols have been adopted by the World Health Organization as standard of care recommendations globally." As I stood to leave, I noticed a small stone placed carefully on top of Jeffrey's headstone, the traditional Jewish symbol of remembrance, indicating someone else had visited recently. This was unusual. While friends and colleagues occasionally accompanied me on memorial visits, few came independently. Curious, I examined the stone more closely and noticed a small folded paper tucked beneath it. Opening it carefully, I found a brief handwritten note. "Your collaborative platform identified the treatment that gave me 5 additional years with my father before his condition finally progressed. Those years were his gift to me. Your vision was your gift to us both. With grateful respect, A." The initial A for Angela confirmed what the message's content suggested. She had visited Jeffrey's grave independently, acknowledging privately that her father's life had been directly improved through the collaborative research approach she had once dismissed. This gesture, private rather than performed for strategic advantage, suggested genuine evolution rather than calculated positioning. Not transformation into someone fundamentally different, but growth into a more balanced perspective that acknowledged value beyond immediate self-interest. 20 years after Jeffrey's death, at 83, I found myself preparing to transition leadership of the Walsh Trust to the next generation. My role had evolved from protective guardian during the Trust's vulnerable early period to strategic guide as it established its effectiveness, and finally to elder advisor as younger leaders with fresh perspectives took increasing responsibility. My final official act as the Trust's primary guardian would be delivering the keynote address at the 20th anniversary conference, an event that had grown to include thousands of participants representing every aspect of medical research and patient advocacy globally. As I prepared my remarks in the quiet of my study, surrounded by photographs documenting both Jeffrey's life and the Trust's evolution, the telephone rang, a call from Sophia Mendez, a patient advocate whose life had been extended through treatments developed via the collaborative platform and who now directed the Trust's Patient Advocacy Division. The Universal Access Initiative just received WHO certification, she reported, excitedly. The protocol we developed for implementing collaborative research in regions with limited infrastructure has been officially recognized as international best practice. Every major research institution worldwide has committed to the implementation standards. This development, universal adoption of the methodologies Jeffrey had initially designed, represented the culmination of 20 years of demonstrating that balanced approaches could achieve superior outcomes for all stakeholders. The conference, venue the following morning, hummed with energy as thousands of participants gathered to celebrate 20 years of collaborative achievement. As I waited in the preparation room before the opening session, I was surprised by a knock at the door. Opening it revealed Angela, whom I hadn't seen in person for several years since her retirement from Westbrook. I came to witness the leadership transition, she explained. It seems an appropriate moment to acknowledge how thoroughly history has validated the approach you and Jeffrey fought to protect. This admission, that the balanced methodology she had once dismissed had proven its effectiveness beyond reasonable dispute, represented significant evolution from her initial resistance. The Universal Access Initiative certification is particularly meaningful, she continued. When I think about how I once characterized collaborative approaches as economically unsustainable, the evidence has proven otherwise so conclusively that even the most profit-focused enterprises have adopted the model voluntarily. Jeffrey understood that sustainability and purpose aren't inherently contradictory, I noted. He never expected commercial enterprises to operate as charities, only to consider human welfare alongside financial returns when establishing priorities. Angela nodded, a flash of something like regret crossing her features. I've had 20 years to reflect on what might have been different if I had understood that balanced approach earlier, not just professionally but personally as well. This hint at how her prioritization of control might have affected her relationship with Jeffrey represented perhaps her most significant acknowledgement of personal error. I called you a parasite at his funeral, she stated directly, finally addressing the cruel moment that had initiated our decades-long journey. It was calculated, cruelty designed to diminish you in front of witnesses who might influence future control. It reflected exactly the flawed understanding I've spent 20 years gradually recognizing, that relationships based on exploitation rather than mutual value creation ultimately fail even on purely practical terms. This direct acknowledgement, naming her behavior without qualification or excuse, suggested genuine evolution rather than strategic positioning. I've come to understand, she concluded quietly, that the true parasite in any relationship is the one who extracts value without contributing to mutual growth, who views connections through the lens of control rather than collaboration. By that measure, I was the actual parasite in our triangle, not you. This admission completed a circle that had begun beside Jeffrey's casket 2 decades earlier. The words she had wielded as weapon had ultimately revealed more about her approach to relationships than about my contributions to my son's life and work. Thank you for that acknowledgement, I responded simply, neither dismissing its significance nor suggesting it erased the history between us. Recognition of previous error represents meaningful growth, regardless of when it comes. As she nodded acceptance of this measured response and prepared to depart, I offered one final reflection. Jeffrey believed fundamentally in the possibility of evolution, that systems and people could grow toward more balanced functioning given appropriate structures and sufficient time. The Trust's impact has validated his faith in systematic evolution. Your personal growth across these decades has confirmed his belief in individual capacity for perspective expansion as well. That evening, after the leadership transition ceremony concluded to sustained applause from thousands of attendees, I returned to my hotel room and opened the small leather portfolio I had carried throughout my years as the Trust's guardian. Inside was the last letter Jeffrey had written me, The private message separate from his legal directives that had provided guidance through 2 decades of protecting his legacy. The paper had grown fragile with handling. The creases deepened by countless readings during difficult decisions and milestone moments. His handwriting still evoked both pain and comfort, the permanent absence alongside continuing presence through values maintained and purposes protected. "Mom," he had written, "if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to our plan, though in the worst possible circumstances. I want you to know that preparing for this possibility with you has been a strange gift, a chance to ensure my work continues with its true purpose intact, but more importantly, a chance to tell you what I couldn't always express in our daily lives." The letter's conclusion had proven particularly prophetic as events unfolded across 2 decades of the Trust's evolution. In creating structures to protect purpose rather than preserve control, we plant trees whose shade will benefit people will never meet. There's a certain peace in that perspective, that contribution matters more than credit, that impact transcends individual presence, that genuine legacy exists in values perpetuated rather than authority maintained. This wisdom had guided every decision throughout the Trust's development. The leadership transition celebrated today represented the culmination of that approach, creating self-sustaining systems that would continue functioning effectively beyond any individual's involvement. As I carefully refolded the letter, I reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed devastating loss into expanding purpose across 20 years. The grief remained, a permanent alteration to my life. But alongside it stood living evidence that values protected could continue influencing systems and lives far beyond any individual's direct contribution. 20 years after standing silent, beside my son's casket while being publicly diminished by his widow, I had witnessed how thoroughly history had validated both his vision and our careful protection of it. The trust we had established together, both the legal entity and the deeper bond between mother and son, had proven stronger than those who sought to control or diminish it. In that enduring strength lay confirmation of what matters most in creating meaningful legacy. Not power, but purpose. Not control, but contribution. Not dominance, but values perpetuated through continued positive impact on human lives. The woman, who had called me a parasite, had eventually recognized a fundamental truth: that genuine legacy isn't transmitted through control or domination, but through values embodied and purposes protected. By that measure, the relationship Jeffrey and I had shared, mutually supportive, ethically aligned, focused on contribution rather than control, had created ripples that would continue expanding long after both our lifetimes had ended. The word, once wielded as weapon, had lost all power to wound, revealed as profound misunderstanding of what constitutes meaningful contribution. As 20 years had conclusively demonstrated, genuine legacy isn't measured primarily in assets controlled or authority maintained, but in values perpetuated and lives improved through continued positive impact. By that deeper, truer measure, the journey that began beside a casket had culminated in confirmation of what Jeffrey had understood intuitively: that purpose protected outlasts presence maintained, that contribution matters more than control, that genuine legacy exists not in power preserved, but in values perpetuated through expanding positive impact on human lives. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.